Dear friends, I'm Operator Starsky, and today we've passed 3 years of Russia's desperate invasion of Ukraine. Rallies around the world, summaries, Russian oil refineries on fire. There is a lot to talk about today. My dear friends, this is the Frontline Focus. Let's roll. Exactly 3 years ago, around 4 5 a.m., I woke up due to the sounds of explosions. I recorded a video addressing the Ukrainian citizens, took my backpack, and went to the brigade in Hostomel. The base looked pretty much deserted because all of my guys, all of our vehicles and personnel were deployed in Donbass just a couple of days prior. One thing looked pretty much new to me. It was this enormous crater from the Russian cruise missile that hit our orchard and stripped a civilian dorm from its windows. According to the Russian sources, they conducted a mass missile strike and completely annihilated our base, which wasn't really the case, but the crater looked impressive. I bet if you had tools, you could easily find a dinosaur in there. The next thing that took place shortly after that was this infamous Russian helicopter attack on the Hostomel airfield located just across the fence from us. Approximately 300 Russian soldiers, their special force troops, that is Spetsnaz and paratroopers, covered by the Russian attack helicopters, spent several hours fighting against about 200 Ukrainian conscripts, basically young but well-trained 20-year-olds, and a bunch of their staff officers. Unfortunately, I cannot tell the exact duration of the battle, but we were fighting until we ran out of ammo and man-pads, and shortly after that, we requested artillery and hit the Hostomel runway and the Russian elite at the airfield, rendering it completely useless. One thing that we were not aware back then was that those couple hours of fight actually didn't let the Russian cargo airplanes land in Hostomel and invade Kiev. And in the evening, Ukrainian paratroopers arrived and cleared the area of the remaining Russian Spetsnaz. The next day, that 50-mile-long Russian column of troops arrived, and we had to leave Hostomel once again for about a month. The Russian invaders were extremely happy about taking a village of Hostomel, not realizing that their main objective of this whole Russian military operation, which is taking the capital city of Kiev, will no longer be possible, and basically that is when Russians lost the war. Could the Russians take Kiev? Potentially they could, had they concentrated more personnel, had their attacks in Brovary or Makariv hasn't failed, and had they relocated more troops from Donbass towards Kharkiv, Sumy, Chernihiv and Kiev Oblast. But Russians believed that they could not be stopped, and that is why they brought two little men into Europe's second largest country. And within the next months, they lost Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy, Kharkiv Oblast, and eventually Kherson. And over the following 3 years, their advance slowed down so much, so the Russians found themselves completely unable to regain those territories, no matter what Douglas MacGregor was saying about us collapsing within the next 2 weeks, because later he was just repeating the same boring story over and over and over again for the next 3 years. Russia had lost about 1/3 of its Black Sea fleet, including the flagship Moscow and even a submarine. They've lost majority of their big landing ships prepared to invade Odessa, and they never recovered from this, being forced to move the whole fleet from the Black Sea. And by the end of the third year, Russians slowly lost their advantage in terms of artillery and armored vehicles. As for their air dominance, I'm not even mentioning it because it was never established, unlike, for example, in Syria, before they ran away from there. Also, despite their initial advantage in terms of UAVs like Orlan or Zala, the Russians eventually lost this one as well, with Ukraine producing almost 100,000 long-range drones and 2.2 million FPV drones for Ukrainian army in 2024 alone, currently spending fantastic 1/3 of their budget on the war they cannot win. Russians invest a lot in the informational warfare, convincing the international community that Russia is still winning, that it's still a superpower that is worth being feared. My friends, reality is that today, when planning their operations, Russians are not concerned about having enough tanks or artillery anymore. They are concerned about having enough donkeys and cannon fodder from North Korea. Who could imagine this happening back in 2022 when Douglas MacGregor predicted the collapse of the Ukrainian army within the upcoming several weeks? Personally, I didn't see that coming. Not really. At this point, roughly half of the Russian oil production has ceased due to the strikes on the Russian oil refineries and terminals, which cannot be repaired fast due to the sanctions placed on this country. Over the past week alone, three biggest Russian oil refineries in Ryazan, Tula, and Krasnodar stopped functioning due to the good Ukrainian drones. And already in 2022, the Terrorist Federation solidly topped the rating of the most sanctioned countries of the world, being later recognized as a terrorist regime by Europe in October and NATO in November of 2022. Due to the Russian invasion, the European countries are slowly but steadily increasing their defenses. For example, Germany alone produces approximately 300,000 artillery shells for Ukraine per year. The European countries react to the terrorist Russian threat as well as informational and cyber threats posed by this country. Ukrainian specialists united their efforts with their European colleagues to help deflect Russian hybrid attacks on democracies. However, much more can be done, my dear friends. The experts estimate that by 2026, Russia will face a critical shortage in terms of artillery, tanks, and finances. Fact is, the upcoming Russian military and economic collapse is a reality, and that is why at this point they need to either continue their advance as fast as they possibly can, which is something they cannot achieve, or by pressing Ukraine towards a ceasefire, as well as removing sanctions in order to replace losses, which is again something they cannot achieve. However, they do try really, really hard. Why the Russian peace conditions are unacceptable for Ukraine? For instance, this gentleman, Mr. Steve Witkoff, after negotiating with Russians, acknowledged that the Istanbul agreements, otherwise known as the Act of Ukrainian Capitulation, will be considered a guidepost for the peace deal between Ukraine and Russia.
The Russians have indicated that they are responsive to an end to this. There were very, what I'll call cogent and substantive negotiations framed in something that's called the Istanbul Protocol Agreement. We came very, very close to signing something, and I think we'll be using that framework as a guidepost.
So what's wrong with the Russian demands, and why didn't Ukraine sign the agreement with Russia back in 2022 in Istanbul? Let's take a closer look at the Russian demands. Neutrality of Ukraine, which means no NATO, no Euro integration, no international military exercises on its territory, while again the only reason Ukraine got attacked was because it wasn't a NATO member, which instantly caused, by the way, two other countries, Finland and Sweden, to join NATO. Russia demanded Ukraine to decimate its army down to the laughable 50,000 troops, which we all understand why they demanded it. And if you don't understand why, then please take a look at what Dmitry Peskov was stating officially just days before the Russian invasion.
Призываем задать себе вопрос, какой смысл России на кого-то нападать? Призываем.
Among other demands were giving up the territories annexed by the Terrorist Federation in 2014, also gifting 4 more regions which Russia is not even in full control of as of today, and additionally full and unstoppable Russian cultural and religious expansion of the Ukrainian territory was demanded by Russians. Why should Ukrainians be forced to adopt the alien culture and religion still remains a mystery to me. Because Ukraine, my dear friends, has much more in common with the European democracy than with this atrocious and violent terrorist federation, which, by the way, is extremely dangerous for common people on the streets. If you've ever been to Turkish or, for example, Egyptian hotels full of Russian tourists, you must understand why the whole world despises this antisocial nation. Therefore, my friends, even comparing Ukrainians or any other nation of the world to the Russian toilet thieves and rapists is highly, highly insulting. Meanwhile, on weekend and today, massive rallies around the world in support of Ukraine are taking place globally. I hope that we will meet at one of them. And if you've already been to one, please let us know in the commentaries where exactly it happened. 3 years since the Russian invasion, the world still keeps standing for Ukraine, democracy, and freedom. And this is something that no fear or propaganda can change, my friends, because decency will always prevail. Dear friends, please subscribe to stay informed about the most important updates and share this content to help Ukraine be heard. I will see you in the commentaries, wishing you all the best. I'm Operator Starsky. As always, be safe.